help us mitigate the climate crisis, help us adapt to the climate crisis. That there's a really positive story when we talk about food as well. And we can also, of course, woo people with taste. Woo people with the kinds of meals that we had last night that were that made you feel so good eating it, and that tasted so good as well. And the other thing I think that we can do, and that I believe is really one of the strategies to help motivate people to become part of the solution, is to not just give people the sort of simple green checklist of, kind of eat this, don't eat that of green food, but is to really engage each other in a conversation about what are our shared values. And then look at what are the solutions that emerge when you talk about those values. And so I'm going to talk about 3 values that I think are really important. But I think this values conversation is so essential to have. Because if we don't have it, if we just give people the simple, 10 things you can do to save the planet, and, here's that checklist, just bring it to the grocery store and you've done what you need to do. If we don't have that values conversation, what we're already seeing, and Hank talked a little bit about it in the intro, what we're already seeing is the ability for our movement and our work to be co-opted. To have Monsanto be able to say they are a sustainable agriculture company, or to have Sarah Lee, I don't know if any of you saw this, Sarah Lee earlier this year announced its earth-friendly bread. Well, if you scratch the surface beneath that ad campaign, what you'd realize is that actually those earth-friendly grains were just 10% of the grains used in those loaves of earth-friendly bread. And if you scratch beneath the surface of what is earth-friendly grains, you learn that they're grains being grown by farmers who use 10% less of the pesticides that they would normally use. To me, it doesn't seem so earth-friendly. But what we're already seeing is that if you don't have that values conversation, yes, our messages can get co-opted. You can have a situation, and I'll just share this one, but there are many more like this. You have a situation where, with a very straight face, you have representatives from a company like McDonald's who presented at a green marketing conference I went to in New York City earlier this year, tell the gathered audience that while we all might think of McDonald's as a fast food company, we're wrong. That actually McDonald's is a community-building company and a sustainability company that uses fast food as a means toward building community and helping the planet. So, as proof, the woman, she was the chief marketing officer for McDonald's, and she had a really fancy PowerPoint that was going while she was talking with beginning and ending with a slide of the new branding for McDonald's is taking those golden arches, and now they're no longer golden, but they are, do you guess what color? Green. So in her presentation, her evidence for how much this company is now a sustainability company, not a fast food company selling us food that's making us sick, is a campaign she was really proud to announce of a partnership with McDonald's and Conservation International in the EU, where they had just launched that summer a new Happy Meal, and it was the McDonald's Endangered Species Happy Meal. So in this Happy Meal, you could choose from one of 6 different fluffy little animals. There was the fluffy little cute polar bear, there was the cute little Siberian tiger, and there were 4 other endangered species. And the concept, of course, is that you would want to collect them all, right? That's the concept of these Happy Meals. You have 6 different toys, and so you have to get all 6. And that then kids would be inspired to go online and learn about what they could do to help endangered species, because now they've collected all 6, and now they have this, connection to all these 6 cute animals, and there would be a list of things that they could do to help this endangered species. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that on that list of the things that these kids could do to help save the planet and protect those endangered species, not eating at Happy Meals and not eating at McDonald's was probably not on that list, right? But so she announced this, and she was very proud of it, and I think, to me, it is evidence of, as you were saying, evidence that these companies are starting to hear our discontent, which actually I think we should take as a sign that there have been some successes. Think about it, just a year and a half earlier, McDonald's had a very different branding message. And they partnered with a very different institution for a very different Happy Meal. Just a year and a half earlier, they had partnered with General Motors for a Hummer-themed Happy Meal, where you could choose one of 6 different Hummers, and they sold 42 million of these Happy Meals that summer. So in a year and a half, this company shifted from thinking that it would be smart branding to align themselves with one of the biggest gas-guzzling cars in the country, to thinking that, oh, well, wait a second, maybe we need to align ourselves with this kind of green imagery. That was the sound of the McDonald's executives when they saw the presentation about how to rebrand. So I'm going to go sort of go out again on sort of another limb here and suggest that what we need to do to really help ensure that our message stays intact and isn't so easily co-opted is, as I said, talk about our values. And when we really ground our work in these values, then it becomes really clear kind of what's the real deal and what's the greenwashing. And I'll just go through the 3, and of course there are others, and your core values might feel resonant with you. You might have others, but I'm going to talk about 3 today. So the first is the value of ecology. And for those of you who don't know, the word ecology it's in a lot of ways a very simple word. It comes from the Greek oikos, for house or dwelling. And it was coined first in the 1870s, but it really took root in the U.S. in the 1960s as a term that environmentalists and eventually ecologists started to use as a way to really emphasize the importance of relationships and interconnectedness. And I think the term ecology, that vision of ecology, is essential to our defining what a sustainable food system is. You know, it's not about a company just coming in and taking away some chemical input and putting it to non-chemical inputs and calling it sustainable. It's really looking at the interconnectedness of all of the organisms and microorganisms of a farm, looking at the interconnectedness of the people and the farmers, looking at the interconnectedness of the farm and the community, and emphasizing those connections. And so just by way of kind of definition, I want to just take you to one of what I would define as an ecological farm, just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what I think it looks like. And this farm I write about in the book, it is a few miles west of Madison, Wisconsin. It's called New Forest Farm, and it's in the driftless region of Wisconsin. And I traveled to the farm first in 2008. If any of you remember that year, what happened that summer, there was a terrible, terrible flooding in the Midwest, right? And the Midwest, it was hit by some of the worst flooding in history. By the time all of the rain was over, the state had, that region suffered about $15 billion in damages, 24 people had died. And by the time I got to his farm, as I was driving out to his farm, you could still see farms just completely submerged in water that looked like lakes, not farms. So I get to this farm. I'd never met Mark Shepard before. He's the founder of New Forest Farms. And I was really bracing myself to hear about tragedy. I was really bracing myself to hear that he lost everything. I know most farmers in this country live on the edge of financial security, and so I was expecting to hear his story and expecting to be quite depressed by it, frankly. And so I arrived. And it was very cinematic. When I pulled up to his farm, the clouds were just starting to part, and the sun started coming in through the clouds, and the sunbeams were falling onto Mark and his farm intern, who were lounging in the late afternoon sun on the deck of his apple cider mill that he'd just finished building, that was to be powered by the solar panels that would be on top of the mill, and would further his efforts to have a completely fossil fuel independent farm. So he's lounging there. He does not look like a devastated farmer. And the first thing I asked him when I pull up is, of course, are you okay? Haven't you fared? How's the farm? And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Anna? He said, a lot of his farms have been devastated. And we could see just across the road, he was surrounded by typical American industrial corn fields. And you could still see just across the road deep gullies that had been created from the downpour of the rain because those farms, their soil was so weak, they were so fragile, they were completely devastated. Now he looked at me and he said, Anna, he said, actually, yes, we did lose about 4% of some of our crops that were in a particularly vulnerable spot on the farm, but frankly, some of our crops have never been better. And so we're standing there, and he's telling me the story, and he's pointing out all of what he's growing. He's just listing them and rattling them off, and I was barely keeping up, trying to take down notes of bush cherries and Siberian peas and apricots and cherries and kiwis and olives and mulberries and blueberries and roses and asparagus and hickory nuts and oak and apples and chestnuts and on and on and on and on. And his farm really embodied this idea that there is strength and resilience in diversity. Farmers have always known this. And this emphasis of industrial agriculture on one crop at one time has been part of our undoing. What he also emphasized is that at the core of ecological farming is caring for the soil, building healthy soil. And when you build healthy soil through agroecological practices and not trying to create fertility, for instance, with synthetic chemicals, what you create is soil that is so very rich in carbon, so rich in microorganisms, that it becomes thriving land for crops to grow on, but it also becomes more like a sponge, so that when there is really heavy rain, your land can actually absorb it. And that's what he found on his farm. And so what I found on his farm was what I talk about in the book as the kinds of farms that we need in the face of what we know the climate crisis will mean, more droughts and more floods, is we need more resilient farms and more farms that look like Mark's. The other reason why his farm, I would argue, is such an ecological farm is because of his relationship to his consumers and his relationship to his community. That he was able to farm this way because he was a member of a farmer co-op that he was able to sell to. And so it meant that instead of his farm having to grow tens of thousands of pounds of one crop, he was able to grow a diversity of crops, sell to the farmer's co-op, and then have his crops of whatever they were selling on to the consumer be kind of multiplied out by the farmer members, so that he was able to continue, as he said, to be himself, to be this multi-crop farmer, while at the same time being able to get the money from his farm. The second value that I think is really key, and I think you all here right now are an embodiment of it, is the value of community. And I think about it every week at home when my one-year-old daughter and I stroll the 12 blocks from our tiny apartment in Brooklyn to this beautiful church that houses our weekly community-supported agriculture farm share. And so every week we go and we pick up fresh food straight from our farmer. We pay at the beginning of the season, and as a result, and sort of become shareholders in the farm, and as a result, get this food from the farm every week. And this year, having my daughter just starting on solids, she's tasted her first raspberries, pears, blackberries, green beans, plums, peaches, summer squash, zucchini, and more. And I know it's all coming from a farmer who I know, from practices that I trust, and it has tasted so good. I bought her for the first time organic raspberries from the grocery store last week. She'd only had raspberries from the farm, and I almost felt guilty kind of exposing her to what store-bought raspberries taste like after she devoured the raspberries from the farmers. But there are 222 families and ours that are members of this farm. And we benefit from the farmers' work, and we also share in the risk. Last year, I don't know what last year was like here for farming, but in New York State, it was one of the worst years in farming for farmers for about more than a century. It was so rainy and cold, so rainy in June that the farmers couldn't get their seeds in the ground. We had terrible harvests. Every week we would go, and I will admit our CSA share was very